Hello, everyone. We're streaming live. Attendees in the queue are now being let in across Canada and worldwide. Welcome to What's Up Wednesday once again. My name is Craig Mackay, your host. Our show today is about changes in change management. The practice of change management has reached a maturity level where the importance of change management planning and the methods used have become widely recognized. Today, I have two very special guests who will enlighten us on this very topic. Thank you all for being here. What's Up Wednesday, the digital series, is brought to you by the Institute of Certified Management Consultants of Ontario in cooperation with CMC Canada. We have made a commitment to be here every month on the second Wednesday of the month. So please save a spot for us in your calendar. In fact, go a step further and invite some other friends, members, guests, and colleagues. Let's just get this digital thing going in high gear, all right? We love to see you here and have excellent topics and speakers for us to expand our careers and our learning areas in. Next month, for example, November 9th, we will discuss cybersecurity and how to protect yourself from ransomware with Marcus Triano. And in December, on the 14th, exploring Canada's entrepreneurship ecosystem with Kayla Isabel from Startup Canada. If you have suggestions for additional topics or guest speakers, put these ideas in the follow-up survey that we send out after each show. We want to hear from you, our members. If you are a guest today, so glad that you could make it. Consider a full-time membership. There are many benefits, such as competitive and comprehensive business insurance, access to IRAP funds under the Management Advisory Service Program, and an internationally recognized certification that can open doors for doing business in the United States as well as many other countries. Not to mention member discounts on various programs, such as Strategic Change by Design course. Learn more about becoming a member, visit our website at CMC Canada and find out how to join and earn your CMC designation. Some breaking news today, speaking of some international connections here, CMC Canada's nominee for the 2022 International Constantinus Awards has won the gold medal prize. The project winner, South Sask Ready, sector-level feasibility study offsetting clean energy transition impacts on a coal-reliant rural economy. Wow, that sounds pretty interesting. Congratulations to the entire team in Saskatchewan involved in this project. Another activity to consider for community recognition is our pro bono program. We're actually looking for consultants to fill a few opportunities already lined up. You can help provide benefits to your community that might otherwise not be available. It's another way to earn CPD points. Actually, attending this show will earn you CPD points, which are, as you may know, an annual requirement to maintain your CMC designation. Most importantly, the pro bono program will help you work with local NPOs and business communities to boost your reputation and create goodwill. People see you in action, see you doing good deeds through this program. It's worthwhile looking into. And speaking of paying it forward, I would like to acknowledge the lands of the Indigenous peoples today from coast to coast to coast. We really have both sides of the country covered today. We have one guest speaker from Newfoundland and Labrador and the other from British Columbia. On behalf of Louise Harris, our speaker from Newfoundland, we would like to respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral unceded homelands of the Beothuk and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral unceded homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. On behalf of Dawn Marie Turner, our speaker from BC, we would like to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Malahat and Cowichan nations. And here in Ottawa, we respectfully acknowledge the Algonquin people and Algonquin lands and our gratitude for the beautiful outdoors. A few housekeeping rules for today's presentation. Stay on mute. Put your questions in the chat as per usual. However, we are planning for a more engaging an extended Q&A portion of the show. So we're hoping to select some of the best questions and unmute your mic to address the panel directly. As you know, this show will be recorded and made available on the CMC Canada YouTube channel. Members will also receive a PDF copy of today's deck. Our two guest speakers have an incredible amount of experience and expertise in change management. We are very fortunate to have them here today together. Dr. Marie Dawn Turner is a CMC, an author, speaker, organizational change specialist, and trainer on change leadership and management. Dawn Marie is a graduate from Dalhousie University, the University of Manitoba, and Walden University, where she acquired her PhD. She is the creator of the Readiness Mindset, as well as author of Launch, Lead, Live. By focusing on the perspective of people who need to adopt change, Dr. Turner shows leaders how they can prevent resistance and make better use of the time and resources they invest in change. She can help turn change from a liability to an asset. Dr. Louise Harris is the founder of the Change Design Institute, president of STOS Consulting, and creator of the Strategic Change by Design Certificate Program. As a certified management consultant, certified change management practitioner, and enterprise architect, Louise has led and advised on the development and implementation of challenging technological changes, as well as process and cultural change initiatives in the public and private sector. Her passion for helping organizations involve people more effectively and collaboratively in change led her to dive into a PhD at Memorial University. Her research at MUM, her integrated neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and design thinking to develop methods and visual tools to involve more people with less effort to make better decisions about what and how to transform and to increase their change capability. It is with great pleasure that I welcome both Dawn Marie Turner and Louise Harris to the show today.
Thank you very much, Craig. I'm delighted to be here. It's fantastic.
Yes, thank you, Craig, for inviting me as well. And it's wonderful for Dawn and I to do this together, actually. So let's dive right in. Organization change is comprised of two aspects: structural change and individual change.
And one of the things that we know is that it's key for the interaction. We need to balance and work with both what we want in our structure for our organizations, but in order to create and enable the structural changes we want in our organization, we need to understand how individuals engage, respond, react, and move through the process of change. Because at the end of the day, all of your structural changes, your organizational changes, are dependent on individuals making self-change within their own activities and their behaviors. And what we're starting to see is a better integration and realization of the importance of the two components and a willingness to better balance those two components as leaders approach change in their organization. And that's what we want to talk about today.
Yes, thanks, Dawn and Marie. And one of the things that was a little challenging for us when Craig asked us to talk on trends in change management, and as Dawn Marie and I discussed this together, we both came to the same conclusion that the trends in change management are actually not particularly new thinking. It's just that organizations are starting to catch up on thinking that has been developed and research that has been going on for a few years. So when we talk about trends in change management today, we are identifying trends that are happening with some new thinking, but a lot of thinking that isn't really that new. And the vanguard has been doing this for some time, and now we are seeing the vanguard increase and become more mainstream. So let's start with structure change. Rapid evolution of digital tech and societal expectations are making impacts on all aspects of an organization structure. Adopting digital technology no longer just requires new skills, but it also requires changing and rethinking the way that work is done. This is impacting processes, business models, roles, and interactions amongst people at all levels in the organization and outside the organization. The increasing pace of change means that organizations need to be more agile, able to respond more quickly and change more quickly. And being strategically and operationally agile requires focusing on achieving outcomes rather than delivering outputs. And shifting this focus requires new capabilities, organizational capabilities, and individual capabilities, which lead to a need for new structures. So what we're seeing is the realization, the understanding of the circular nature of change, in that the external changes are impacting our structures. And then we're also realizing, organizations are also coming to realize more clearly, we actually also need to additionally change our structures in order to change in a more agile fashion. And those structures that need to change, yes, our technology structures, our process structures, we're seeing a lot of business model structure change. And we're seeing a trend now for the realization that our leadership structures need to change. And this will enable distributing the building of trust and commitment. As we have to change quickly, we can't rely on one leader to provide all of that leadership. We can't rely on consultants to provide that leadership. So we're seeing changes in leadership structures to enable agile change. We're also seeing changes in interaction structures. So how do people interact with each other and with leaders? This is becoming much flatter. And communications technologies and internal social media and various ways for people to communicate interactively are enabling this, such that insights and risk identification can be collected directly from the front line or from the back office without going through a whole level of bureaucratic layers that usually water it down. And then we're also seeing changes in decision-making structures. So the decision-making processes, how do we make decisions about what and how to change? This is becoming more distributed, which allows broader input from data analytics, which enables more people to make decisions. Also broader input from people, as we just talked about interaction structures changing, as more people provide input into the decision-making processes about how we change and also what we change. This enables stronger change ownership and more robust solution design. So all of these structural changes are having greater impact on individuals. And as we consider how to evolve these structures, which is why organizations are starting to think about evolving their structures in the first place, is to improve the results of change, to reduce the stress and effort of change, because we have to change more quickly. We need to go beyond popular resistance management approaches. Sometimes perhaps even throw them out. And Dawn-Marie, I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us about emerging trends in supporting individual change that are leading to better integration of organization change with individuals.
Thanks, Louise. I think one of the things that Louise mentioned is that we are wanting to change more quickly, that the recognition that the need to be responsive in a dynamic environment means, in order to have those structural changes, which ultimately is to benefit and grow whatever the business or the organization is to do it, then we need people who are what I call change ready, people who can engage quickly with change, who can not be afraid of it and not immediately want to try and hang on to the current state. And in order to do that, then we need to understand what happens and how individuals move through the change process, what that interaction looks like. And as Louise said, I've been working on a readiness approach for over 20 years. So it's nice to see there is a growing trend in there and letting go of that belief model of resistance. But the first thing we want to do is really understand that at an individual level or in a consultant level, we need to be able to know how to build that readiness. And it starts by understanding and knowing that there is a predictable pattern that we go through, all of us as human beings, not them and then us, or us and then them. And this predictable pattern is the way we interact and engage with change. It influences how we will respond, and more like a dance as we go through various components of the change. It's also important to recognize that humans have an innate capability for change. We don't resist change. We have a natural ability to change. And what we need to do as leaders and consultants is learn how to engage that natural curiosity and ability to change. And all of that then is reliant on understanding the beliefs and the way our beliefs, both our conscious beliefs and some of our subconscious beliefs, influence the pattern and influence our reaction and our responses to change. For example, our beliefs about our capacity or the organization's capacity and capability to take on the kind of structural changes that are being announced and imposed. Your organizational history with change. Do you have a lot of change that starts and stops, wasn't successful, multi-level changes that aren't well coordinated and holistically looked at? Their beliefs about the outcome or the need for change, all of those, as well as other subconscious beliefs, drive out what will then be predict our behaviors and influence that predictable pattern. And then the emotions that are created based on those beliefs and those past actions. You know, emotions have really been given a bad rap. You know, most leaders are taught to take emotion out of the equation. And what we're really beginning to understand and have over the past several years is the importance of that emotional component of the change process, and also how much our emotions are tied to and intertwined with even our logical, quote unquote, logical decisions. And so we really need to begin to understand how those emotions are integral to our logic. We don't make decisions without engaging our emotional response system first. And so without an awareness of that, we're really working blind as leaders. So, you know, we need to begin to understand how that predictable pattern is influenced by our beliefs. Our emotions are intertwined with that. And that drives the kind of behaviors that you're going to see as you announce and engage with people during the change process. Our behaviors are the way we act out the beliefs and respond to our emotions. So many of the behaviors that leaders often use as evidence of resistance are part of a normal process. And if you can, when you begin to understand that, you can tap into that and use that in a way that will drive out that resistance and allow you to make those kind of structural changes. And lastly, from an individual perspective, we really need to begin to understand how mindset then provides a kind of a filter and a way of interpreting everything that we're seeing, and the way we filter the information and see what's happening. So we interpret the information that comes in based on the behaviors and the emotions that we see in people and ourselves based on our mindset. And so what I've seen over the past 20 years since I've been working in the business is that most leaders are working with a resistant mindset, that belief that people are resistant to change. And what we need to, and that's why I created the readiness mindset, we need to shift that to a mindset that is grounded in the belief that people have the innate ability to change and create an experience that prepares and allows people to build on that foundation and that capability. So that when you start to do that, you can tap into that normal response and use it to help create those structural changes. So we see an integration between the individual components and a recognition of these factors and how they influence and impact what you need to accomplish from a structural level.
So when we think about that, how do we actually integrate structural change with individual change? We have a trend, a realization that this needs to happen. How do we go about that? And one of the things that Dawn Marie and I have both discovered is that outcomes are a very key integration point, focusing on the outcomes of the change, not the outputs, not the deliverables, not the technology or the process, but the outcomes. What is the purpose of the change? And outcomes not only for organizations, but also the outcomes for the individuals. And integrating these outcomes, Dawn Marie, explain one of the key trends of integrating these outcomes.
One of the key trends is storytelling. Here again, what we're seeing, storytelling is not new. Your employees and we as humans, it's our natural communication system. And from a structural perspective, you need goals and objectives and cases for change and business. But to connect with that individual component, to allow people to align with what you need on that, we need stories. We need to create the stories and be able to tell them through active, dynamic conversations and be willing to engage and allow people to connect with the story of what that means for them, what it means for the organization, and be able to tell their story. It's not just about the organizational outcomes, but it's also about the personal outcomes and allowing them to see that, to begin to use that storytelling to build capability, tying their personal outcomes with your organizational outcomes. That is how we start to build the commitment and create a greater level of readiness for change overall. And begin to create some ownership around that. So tying the storytelling with those goals and objectives.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, so no, I was just going to say, I just wanted to jump on the point that Dawn Marie said, that people will tell stories anyways. And so it'll happen anyways. This is not something new. And if the trend that we're seeing, the recognition that's happening, is that leaders can actually influence those stories such that the stories that people tell are aligned with the organizational objectives. If that is a growing trend, to see that, to identify how is this change going to be better for individuals? How will it make their work better? How will it give them an increasing sense of satisfaction in serving customers? Whatever it is, how will it increase their career opportunities? There are, a lot of different personal outcomes in those ways. And so when leaders actually help guide those stories, then the stories that people tell and about their personal outcomes, the realizations that they have will align with the organizational outcomes.
And I think it's important, what I see in my work is that leaders are really uncomfortable with the storytelling. And one of the reasons is because we first need to get comfortable with the emotional component, because storytelling connects the intellectual with the emotional. So we need to be able to recognize how we work with the emotional components and not dismiss it in order to build a story with the people that will do the heavy lifting to carry the change through the organization. And that ties back to that individual component and those belief structures that the beliefs and the structures and really ties it together. So getting comfortable with those emotions, getting comfortable with exploring beliefs, getting comfortable with the conversations are all part of building that personal individual readiness, which then supports your structural readiness. Craig.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm a little bit stunned right now because I'm trying to absorb all of this, and I think what's really striking me as how you two as experts in change management have drilled down on the left and the right side of the issue, the structural and the individual. And on the individual side, Dawn Marie, you're talking about, from what I see and understand, you're talking about a greater awareness of the individual's unconsciousness capability to accept change and how you can prepare them for that in a subtle way by telling stories and getting them involved in a manner that's more relaxing and familiar. And then Louise, you're bringing in the structural change whereby the whole corporation has to have some cultural and structural change to be more agile, and that will make change more successful throughout that organization. So those are the two dialectics that I'm getting out of this maturity of change management in the consulting practice. And what I want to do is, first of all, I just want to mention that both of you, being experts in your field, are offering courses in change management. I just want to, before we get to our Q&A portion of this show here, mention that Dawn Marie Turner is offering the Living and Leading Change Leader Certificate course. And you can use the contact information that we've put in the chat and that you'll be getting in the PDF on this presentation to make sure that you can get a hold of Dawn Marie Turner for that if you're interested in it. And Louise Harris and CMC Ontario are offering the Strategic Change by Design Certificate course. You can sign up now for Module 1 and get a 10% discount. Now, what we're going to do here with the Q&A portion is, if you've got a question, type it in, but also use the little reaction mojo, whatever it is down the bottom there, to raise your hand, and then I will see that, and I could possibly open up your mic so that you could pose your question directly to Dawn Marie or Louise. But just to get the ball rolling here, back on my sort of general observation, I had a couple of questions here that I'm going to put out. First of all, to Dawn Marie about encouraging curiosity to help enable change, and this is getting to that unconscious level, I think, of the individual. I wanted you to maybe come up, talk a little bit more about that concretely, but I'm also going to give you an example of what a client of mine did, which I thought was kind of cool. And at the time, I'm an IT guy, so I didn't really get it. I just want to implement the technology. But I know the people have a big say in how that, how the success of that project is going to evolve. At an early point in this project, the client decided that they were going to give the project a name and a character. So they called it the Felix project, and they had the Felix the cat, and the Felix the cat would make announcements. And I thought, this is kind of corny, but I realized that the people who were normally afraid of losing their jobs because of this huge modernization that was going to happen with SAP coming in, or that they knew their jobs were going to completely be redesigned and changed, instead of being worried about that, they were more worried about what Felix was going to say in the next news release. And I thought, when I look back on that, I went, oh, that was a great way to just change the whole tone of what was going on. And all of a sudden, it just became a lot easier to implement the technical things, because the initial concerns that people had were gone. They were more worried about the mascot, what the mascot was saying. So anyways, Dawn Marie, creating curiosity, talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is probably one of the skills, and I call it a skill because I think as leaders, we need to develop it more than we have, is one of the greatest skills that leaders can develop. And what I mean by that is get curious about what you're seeing. When leaders are working with what I call the resistant mindset, it's very easy to dismiss negative feedback, criticism, objections to the change, all of those things as well. That's just evidence of the resistance to change. But if you're curious about it, if you start asking questions about that, you open up a whole new opportunity of understanding, and you'll be able to identify the kind of activities and support they need to move through it. And often what I find is that many of those early criticisms and what leaders call negative feedback, I'm always asked, how do you deal with negative feedback? And I go, it's just feedback. You decide whether feedback is negative or positive. If you get curious about it, then and start asking questions, often what leaders find is that they're asking the same questions, they're engaging in the same way that the leaders did early on when they were assessing whether this change was viable or feasible. And that's part of that predictable pattern that those employees or team members are in that early phase of that predictable pattern of which the leaders usually pass through. So I encourage leaders and tell them to celebrate when people start making complaints, when they start talking about the change, regardless of what they're talking about, that needs to be celebrated, because that means they've connected with it somehow. And there's where storytelling and conversation, coupled with that curiosity, opens up the opportunity for you to guide what happens next.
Well, I mean, I think that's great advice. And humans are by nature curious. And you want to, I think, use that to energy in a positive way. Bill's got a question here, I think, related to that. Tell us a little bit more about storytelling. What channels should leaders use to tell stories? I don't think that means CBC or NBC as a channel, but you can elaborate on that. I think maybe Louise, or tell us a little bit more about storytelling. I mean, that's got to be a way in which you get people's curiosity and well, obviously engagement in the whole project. But
well, there are multiple channels of storytelling and multiple means of storytelling. And I think, Dawn Marie, you can probably share some of the ones that you have used. And then there's one that I experimented with in my research that I will piggyback on what Dawn Marie says. So you go ahead first, Dawn Marie.
Okay, great. Well, I think it's important when we're thinking about channels to recognize that storytelling first and foremost, and conversation is our natural, innate human way of responding. Your employees are telling, or your team or whatever, they're telling stories all the time. So we can look for formal channels. When I work with leaders, one of the very first things I encourage them to do is to create their outcome story. Yes, they have what the goals are, what they want, but the outcome story is deeper than that. The outcome story describes what the organization or the team or the department is going to look, what it's going to feel like, how will people engage, what are the different processes. You used a great example, Craig, with the IT example. If I were going to work with them about the stories, well, what's it going to be like to work with that new software? It's not just about the software. So connect, create, and start with an outcome story, and then use formal and informal channels. So that goes to creating some structures for those active involvements, and recognize how much you're communicating and storytelling whether it's on a Zoom call or if you're back in the office, passing someone in the hall and you're exchanging some information, that's still storytelling. And those are channels that you can use as then creating channels. So one of the things that we have used with organizations is we created a series of, I won't call them town halls, because a town hall is traditionally this: I give you a bunch of information and I ask at the end, are there any questions? But we actually created with the individual areas of the organization a chance for them to engage and create their story for the change that was going on in the organization. So they explored why it was needed. And then at the end of the session, they had a story that they were talking about and telling. So that was a very formal yet informal structure. It was planned, and then we use a lot of the informal pieces. I'm curious to hear, Louise, what you tried.
Yeah. So one of my research was focused on bringing some engineering to change management, which I know makes some people cringe. But what I mean by that is, how can we communicate more effectively and faster? And engineers, any kind of engineer, uses diagrams to communicate how things are fitting together and interacting and impacting each other. And so we actually experimented with using diagrams to create the full story of what is changing and why and who is it impacting. And we did this in healthcare, which is very difficult to engage people because they don't have a lot of time. And you can't get nurses to come to a focus group, not physicians either, actually. And so by building a diagram, so we built this diagram for the nurses. We started off with really wanting to focus on why are we changing. Everybody knew that things weren't working well, that the changes needed to happen, but what were the challenges and what were the priority challenges, and how would solving these challenges make work life better for the different disciplines within this particular healthcare service. And so we created this diagram that had all the different disciplines: nurses, physicians, physios, etc. And we put everybody's challenges up in a process framework. So we had their main process that they used to deliver, it was rehab services, and we put their challenges up in there and kind of drew them across, looked like a swim lane, except we drew them across the different disciplines that were impacted by those challenges, and then what their impact was. And then we spent some time, and so with nurses, we did this on their 10-minute breaks. And they would come in 2s and 3s, and they would look at what was there. They would put marks on, what really impacted them, talk about it. Their manager was sitting there, and then they had the opportunity to add anything. And so all the nurses over 3 shifts, who never ever got to talk together, built this collective diagram together of what their challenges were and how would they like work to be better for them. and in the way that they delivered their services. And it was very visual and very quick and easy to understand. Nobody had to read any long documents or anything like that. And so that's, I think we're seeing a lot more visual depiction of stories and visual storytelling. There's another person I worked with, he does very much graphics, and we were working on a volunteer project with the UN, very bureaucratic, formal organization. And we did the same thing, not so much in a structured diagram, but still using visuals that explained what was happening, who was involved, what were the challenges, and what would the experience be like if we solved those challenges. And, you know, back to what Dawn Marie was saying about the outcomes, what would be the experience? You know, we've all, I'm sure many of you have heard a lot about the whole trend on understanding customer experience. And now, you know, the new trend is employee experience, but not just, you know, onboarding experience, but what's the experience of work? How will work be better, easier, faster, less stressful, more meaningful? Those are the key personal outcomes that can contribute to the organizational outcomes in terms of how we're providing better service to people. So there's another example. Back to Craig.
Yeah, I got Terrace here. I'm going to see if she can pose the question directly.
I just want to add to Louise. I think one of the things that Louise said that's really important as part of the story, and I know from my work with many leaders, it's very challenging. I love the idea of diagrams. We did similar, but not quite the same, is that talking about and allowing people to explore the why. I see many leaders that get concerned that they don't want to open up the conversations and allow people to tell stories about the why. They're going to do it anyway. Whether you, so by providing the channel for them to explore the why, you set the stage for what's required next to build the kind of commitment for action. So one of the things you want to do is then get yourself really comfortable to engage in those conversations. For them to challenge the why is not challenging the change itself. It's part of our innate process in getting comfortable what has been proposed. They need those conversations at an individual level to go next. Just because you know it doesn't mean they do, and just because you tell them doesn't mean they've internalized it. So really important that as leaders, and that's part of that curiosity, is to get really comfortable with those kinds of why questions. Why this change? I don't think it's going to work. Why now? Why them, not us? All of that, and get really solid in it. So I think that was a really important point that Louise made in terms of the base of the story. That's your foundation for all of the stories that will come next.
Well, I mean, I think that getting people to certainly add to the stories and put them in the context of an outcome commits the users to seeing the vision and be participating in the vision and seeing an outcome. And I think once they begin to see some outcome and envision that, then their participation becomes a lot more positive. And the other thing I want to talk about at some point is the attitude of leaders on these change or on projects where there is a lot of change. But I also wanted to see if we can get Terrace here, because she's got an interesting question.
And Craig, I'm a he.
Sorry.
So I guess I should have my pronoun at the end of my name. But anyways, thanks for the opportunity. Great presentation. I'm interested in how you would go about getting broader input from the organization. And the example I put up is a downsizing. So organization is going to be dropping 10% of the employee base. Usually that decision is made by ELT, the board could be involved. How do you get buy-in from the organization? Because as we all know, culture can definitely be affected by these types of moves. So interested in your comments on that. Thank you.
Well, I'll let Louise, do you want to start? And then because I think you've done some work in this area for your PhD.
Yeah. So Terrace, you're right that this is very, very challenging. And I think, the place to start, as Dawn Marie mentioned when she was talking about individual change, is what are people's existing beliefs and about the organization, and how important they are to the organization, because that will frame how you approach this. If the culture of the organization is very much that people are just like any other disposable resource, you're not going to get very valuable input, even if you do make that. And I think that's going to be very difficult. If the culture of your organization is that people are very valuable, every person in the organization is valuable, and that is the belief that the organization cares about them, and that because they are valuable, you will then be able to approach it quite differently in terms of, and how are you going to care for the 10% that are leaving? That's where you have to start. To continue that belief that people are valuable and cared for, that's critical. If that belief is undermined, then really it is kind of pointless trying to obtain broader input from the organization before the change happens, because everyone will be jockeying to make sure that they are important and that they're not cut. And so risks will be magnified, and everything will be kind of not really particularly useful and more difficult to interpret, right? Dawn Marie, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's so important that you recognize what's your culture of the organization and not what's talked about, because there's lots of organizations that talk about the importance of people. Our people are our most valuable asset. And then the first sign of trouble, what's the first strategy they do is the downsizing. You also need to look at, as Louise talked about, is what's been your history in the past with downsizing and other kinds of change initiatives. So if you've got a history of not involving people, of not connecting, if downsizing is the go-to strategy for your organization and it's been done poorly in the past, this is probably not the time to get specific input. And also, again, we go back to curiosity. My question is, what do you want them to buy into when you say, how do we get buy-in for the downsizing? Are you asking people to buy into the idea that 10% of their colleagues will lose their job? That's going to be a difficult buy for most people. So understanding what your culture is, understanding what the downsizing is, having clarity of the outcome, and then as Louise said, knowing how you're going to support the 10% and what's going to happen after the downsizing in terms of who's going to do the work of the people that are gone. Has that been thought about and planned for, of how the new structure will incur, or are you downsizing 10% and then going, well, everybody else just picks up what they did? So it's a thoughtful clarity around the downsizing and appreciating the culture that you have now, and that will be influenced by what culture you have now.
Mm-hmm. And if you are in the position where people don't feel valued, like you don't have that good base to be able to get the input, then you're going to have to do the cut. But I think you're going to need to try and those organizations need to shift their culture. And one of the ways to shift their culture is to very much talk about what they're doing for the people who are being cut and how they're going to handle the workload. Those two big questions, if those can be answered, those are critical questions to be answered in order to shift the belief system. And then after you've done the downsizing, you can then seek broader input if you carry through with the promises that you made about how people would be cared for and how work would be handled.
Any follow-up, Terrace? Lost the mic there. We lost his microphone on mute. Oh, there you go, Terrace.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know what it is with the mic. The example I was thinking of, a new CEO came into an organization. The history had been no layoffs, retrain, culture is important, member owned. New CEO comes in and, first order of business is 10% off the table. So I know that employees that have been left are struggling to come to grips with it, to understand. And I think what you pointed out, it's so important to have that why identified, what and how those people are going to be looked after. What I've been told is there was a pizza lunch served after to the remaining employees to sort of help placate their, feelings about the changes. So not good. I really like your approach, and I hope that others contemplating these types of changes take that to heart when they make them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Terrace. So I'm going to pass the microphone over to Dorothy, and she's got a question on some of the outcomes that we were talking about earlier.
My question is about outcomes. Like, can you give examples of outcomes and how you actually handle them? Like, I've done large scale change, which is a different model somewhat, where there've been thousands of people of all levels, but it's when you have these between the individual and the organization, what are some samples and examples of how you've handled the outcomes? And not all outcomes are positive. So it's how do you get the leaders and the the individuals engaged enough to see what the outcomes are and how they're going to address them? Sorry.
That's a good question, Dorothy. And I have an example that came to mind, so I'll jump in and give that and then turn it over to Dawn Marie. But an example I'd like to give is actually, it was a large financial ERP transformation. Their ERP was over 11 years old, so it wasn't really an upgrade. It was a significant transformation, and they were going from paper invoice processing to fully digital workflows. And so that was a lot. It was government-wide, a provincial government, so that's large scale, not as large as federal government, but pretty large scale. And when we talked about outcomes, one of the major outcomes was they wanted to position themselves for future digital services. So that was a big outcome. This was a foundational thing. Another outcome was that they wanted to improve the service to their vendors. So all the vendors that they paid, people who did snow clearing and, people who or organizations that provided telecommunications and the whole range of vendors for government, right? They wanted to improve the service and enable them to get paid faster. So that was another outcome. One of the things that we do try and do when we talk about this, and you mentioned negative outcomes, is we distinguish between a planned outcome and a negative impact. So an outcome is something that we're planning and looking for. And then, an impact, a negative impact is we didn't really plan to look for it. And it's something certainly that we want to avoid. And so one of the things that we realized as we went through in terms of individual outcomes, because some people were, they wouldn't be spending so much time doing manual work. So they were worried about their job. So but the way that it was framed, because no one was going to lose their job. There was way too much work for what people could do, and this was why they wanted to digitize, was to enable better value people to do higher value work. So a personal outcome was that in actual fact, the level of the value of your work is going to increase, and the interest of your work was going to increase. The variety and interest of your work was going to increase. One of the negative impacts, that unintended negative impacts that came up, was as they centralized invoice processing, this changed the interactions that the regional finance people had with the vendors in their area of the province. And many of them had personal relationships with some of the vendors and helped them do their invoices. So it significantly changed those relationships. And that was, that wasn't realized at first. And so that was an unintended impact that came through as a risk, because there was this flattened interaction where people could put these questions like, okay, so how do I help Joe Blow who can't do his invoice anymore? To proactively, we're going to actually create training for all our small vendors. And the regional invoice clerks are going to be the ones that do the training. So they now they're still supporting, but they're supporting in a different way. And when new, small vendors come on, they can go through the training with the regional clerks. So that, in a sense, increased the value of the regional clerks, because instead of them, doing this manual stuff, they're actually providing support to the vendors to be able to do it better themselves, develop some business skills potentially. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question, Dorothy, around that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I like the idea of negative impacts versus outcomes, because often they don't differentiate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sort of assessing how it's going to impact at all levels.
Mm-hmm.
And did they involve the people at all the levels of how to fix it?
They did. Yeah,
because that's important from the things I've had, because top-down change doesn't work as well as holistic change within the organization.
Yeah, and so they, in a sense, applied the basic lean principle from lean, that the people who are doing the work are, the most suitable to figure out how to change it. And so if the outcome is very clear, we want to enable vendors to be able to seamlessly and easily submit their invoices electronically. Okay, regional clerks, how could we do that? And so it was a combination of two of the regional clerks and one of the central processing and invoice processors that came up with this solution.
Okay.
We're going to try and wrap up here with one more question. I just thought this one was pretty good, and maybe Payman could unmute and post this final question here from the audience.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask my very significant question from myself and maybe for others, that how we can convince our prospective or existing clients that what they are doing or how they are doing it needs to get changed, because mostly they believe that what they are doing is the right thing unless some wrong and negative outcomes come up, and then it's too late to make it happen for them. So I will be more than happy if I can listen to other speakers, and then thank you so much.
I think your Payman. I think right. One of the things, I think one of the trends, I won't, if that's the right word, but one of the things we need to shift around change management. So as it has grown and matured, is that there's this idea that, well, you do change management, and that we can delegate and put it to some group to do. So they want to hire a consultant to do the change management. I think first and foremost, we need to make a shift that the changes that they're announcing and their organization is changing regardless of what they do. But if they want their organization to move in the direction and grow in a controlled, in a in a desired way, then they need to engage with their employees and their teams to guide and influence and allow the structures for the change to occur to get the desired results. And that means integrating the principles and some of the things that we've been talking about today, comfortable with the why, creating that outcome story, what we just talked about, creating that outcome story, integrating those into leadership practices versus viewing change management as something that we do over here, that we begin to help them embed it into general leadership and management practices. Because it's occurring regardless, what they're doing is now channeling what is naturally occurring. I always think of it as capturing the energy from the sun. It's there. Solar energy is there. Learning and appreciating and integrating structural and individual understanding of change allows you to capture the natural energy that's already there.
That's fantastic. And we are always trying to be punctual with this show. So thank you everyone for attending today and for your great questions. I want to thank Dawn Marie Turner and Louise Harris. Thank you so much. Their contact information is available in the PDF, and we will send that out to everybody. I want to thank also CMC Ontario and our events coordinator, Sandra Addison Brock. Next month, on What's Up Wednesday, we've got cybersecurity and malware, how to protect yourself. And in December, Under 40 Executive Award winner Kayla Isabel from Startup Canada will be right here discussing exploring Canada's entrepreneurship ecosystem, and also other events to keep your eyes and ears open for and sign up for. Tomorrow night, happy hour in Alberta, BC Awards, October 20th, Thursday networking, October 27th, the BC Book Club open for everybody in Canada, October 27th, and Strategic Change by Design Module 1 starts October 20th. Sign up now, 10% off. My big takeaway today, by the way, is to be successful in any corporate project, you need to incorporate change management planning somehow, somewhere, even if you have to do it yourself, right, Dawn Marie? Or you get some experts to help you do it properly. And consider the organizational structure and the individual. And what we've heard today really helps us, I think, begin to put that into perspective and add new elements to what we can do as consultants out there with our projects. So thank you everyone again for attending. Have a great autumn. Have a happy Halloween. Get outside and enjoy the beautiful fall colors and leaves and trees. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.